Good evening and a warm welcome to yet another biography event. My name is Kai Bird and I have the honor of serving as director of the Leon Levy Center for Biography, a wholly unique institution hosted by the Graduate Center here and founded by Shelby White and the Leon Levy Foundation in the year 2007. I want to thank Shelby for her steadfast support to the Biography Center. Specifically, I need to thank her for her recent rather incredible contribution of $10 million to our endowment fund, plus another pledge of up to $5 million in matching grants. So if any of you have a little change to spare, the Leon Levy Foundation will match your grant up to an amount of $5 million. And if you give us only $1 million, we'll name one of the fellowships after you. You can talk to me after this event to discuss this fabulous opportunity. I have to make that little pitch. It's a fabulous contribution by Shelby, and we're trying to raise the matching funds. Please note that this is our last event for the semester. We will resume in September. If you have not done so already, please register your email address on our website. But tonight I am delighted to welcome our very own Leon Levy Fellow, Claire Hoffman, who will be discussing her new biography of Aimee Semple McPherson, America's first televangelist. Claire will be in conversation with Debby Applegate, a Pulitzer Prize-winning biographer. Claire is the author of the memoir, Greetings from Utopia Park, and a journalist reporting for national magazines on culture, religion, celebrity, business, and more. She was formerly a staff reporter for the Los Angeles Times and Rolling Stone. She is a graduate of UC Santa Cruz and has an MA in religion from the University of Chicago and an MA in journalism from Columbia University. She now serves on the boards of the Columbia Journalism School, ProPublica, and the Brooklyn Public Library. Debby Applegate won the Pulitzer Prize for biography for her very first book, The Most Famous Man in America, the biography of Henry Ward Beecher. And she is the author of Madam, the biography of Polly Adler, icon of the jazz age. She holds a PhD in American Studies from Yale University and lives in New Haven, Connecticut. I have to say that I am rather eager to hear this conversation precisely because these two biographers have focused on two very colorful women whose stories resonate today in our abysmal political culture. After all, we now have a convicted sexual abuser occupying the Oval Office, and he is wildly popular among evangelical Christians and Orthodox Jews, among others. I don't understand it. But Aimee Semple McPherson's story is all about the influence of evangelical Christianity in American life, and Polly Adler's story is all about sex and politics. So maybe their life stories can explain our weird politics. Claire and Debby will be in conversation for about 40 minutes, and then they will take questions from our in-person audience. Finally, the authors will be signing books afterwards in the lobby. This event is being live streamed, so hello out there to our virtual audience. We will try to end this program after about 1 hour. Again, thanks to the Leon Levy Foundation for funding this and all our other events. I now turn the conversation over to Debby Applegate. Thank you.
Can I make sure? Is this on? Yes, it is. Welcome so much for being here, Claire. I know this is your home. You have been here days and days on end, and you wrote this book here. But nonetheless, it still feels, it's a tremendous privilege to me, for me, and to me, to be able to read this book and be in this conversation. I read this book in 3 sittings. I mean, I gulped it down, which just goes to show that journalists really do know how to write. But they don't always know how to research, but really, you did. The research here is fabulous, and it just goes down so beautifully and so smoothly. There are many things to like about this book, but I will say so that's my word of praise is it's a fabulous book, an easy read. I mean, I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean it precisely. Lots to think about, a rich stew of thought-provoking material and beautiful emotional moments, but also, boy, it just reads beautifully. So I highly recommend the actual experience of not just buying it, but even opening it. But my word of warning is that it's not just that I have a strong-willed woman of the Jazz age to counter yours from the other side of the sin divide, but also my first book was about one of the very first megachurch ministers in the United States, a guy named Henry Ward Beecher, whose church still stands in Brooklyn, Plymouth Church, and still looks very much the same way theatrically. I don't know, Angelus still stands, and do they still have services?
Yes. Yes.
So I'm going to try really hard. My word of warning is I'm going to try really hard to not get into the weeds of weird stuff. So we're going to start. What I thought I would do is ask you to describe Aimee Semple McPherson's life story in its outline, because she was very famous, and many people have heard of her. I certainly had heard of her, but I didn't know really what happened, and it's really amazing. So maybe start there.
Yeah, and thank you so much. That's an amazing introduction, and thank you, Kai, and thank you to the Leon Levy. That's been such an incredible part of this process of making the book. And yes, I read The Most Famous Man in the World and reached out to Debbie as a super fan. So while this may seem like a talk, it's also that I am like a fangirl of Debbie's, which is an incredible book, as is Polly. And I feel like Henry Ward Beecher did a lot of things that Aimee did, 50 years before in a different...
A lot of them.
Sex
is
scandal.
It all right if we call her Aimee? Because when you're,
there's
as
a lot of last
names.
biographers know...
Yeah. Yes.
Also, Semple McPherson is a long
Yeah,
name.
and actually there's no fear in McPherson.
Thank you.
But it's not fun to say.
Okay.
But yeah, so Aimee was born in 1890 in rural Canada, and from sort of the moment she was born, she was treated as special. She had a teenage mother who was married to a much older man, and she was kind of raised, she was an only child and treated as this kind of prophetic gift from God. So she was in a home that was religious, and her mother always told Aimee she was destined for great things. So, and she was kind of a headstrong girl who supposedly memorized the Bible by the time she was 5. Just by the time she was in high school, had a real sort of love of acting and theater, and, was kind of a adorable, fun, outspoken, loud young woman who she felt maybe was falling away from God when she was 17. And on a night in December, she walked into a church and saw a super hot Irish guy preaching, and her whole world changed, and she sort of had a twin experience of falling madly in love with this preacher and understanding that the truth was this Pentecostal outlook, that the Holy Spirit was there, that it was living, it was something that could be experienced physically. And so from that moment, her life changed. She would tell that story over and over her whole life. Trials and tribulations came next, I would say. And yeah.
I don't want to tell the whole story, but you can't understand how important she was unless you can hear about a little bit about her rise. It's really quite something.
Yeah, she came from nothing, had an intense religious conviction, was an itinerant preacher traveling across Canada and up and down the American East Coast and the South, and she arrived in Los Angeles in 1918, and it was like a fish coming to water. She just really immediately she had found her home, and she was somebody who was following a voice from above, And, she, at that point, had gained some renown. She had kind of two husbands in her wake. One was dead and one was left behind. And she had with her her mother, who was this kind of momager type, who was her nanny and accountant and bodyguard and business manager. And just, think of your favorite stage mom, and she sort of, yeah.
She is a stage mom.
She is a stage mom.
That's one of the first sort of hints that you're going to give.
Yes,
I think, that you
yes.
foreshadow. The other is the husbands.
Yes.
There's a moment where the second husband just takes off while they've been camping out and giving, running revivals along the road, where, and for a moment I was like, no, you're not letting that go. And of course not, because he does return later.
He does, yeah. I mean, I would just pause there because she had something that was otherworldly and incredible that really drew in crowds. And sometimes, it's very unusual to see a woman at the front of a church preaching today, and certainly 100 years ago. And people would sometimes come for sort of this like freak show aspect of it, like, oh, let's go laugh and see this woman preach. But then her charisma and the stories that she would tell, the way that she interpreted the gospel, which was not really like hellfire and brimstone, but more sort of uplifting, romantic, kind of almost rapturous language about heaven and what life was meant to be, I think it really drew people in. So by the time she got to Los Angeles in 1918, she had just an incredible national following. And her mother, the reason I mention her mother is her mother would sign up subscribers along the way, like take down people's names and address, take their checks, and build a base, so to speak.
Well, her mother's the main character.
Yeah.
I mean, you might think that it is with the men in her life, but really, wouldn't you say that's the fundamental relationship?
Yeah, it's a mother-daughter story.
Which is, I hate to say it, not unusual in real life, but a little unusual in biographies. So often it's the strong father figure or the son, or even a daughter, the Margaret Fuller effect, I often think. You don't really hear so many stories like this, which is why it is so sad when things begin to go sour.
Yeah.
So they build this extraordinary institution. Could I also ask you, I know that it is, I don't mean in any way to say this as if it's an oddity, but of course she speaks in tongues, and she is an ecstatic religious figure and brings forth her audience.
Yeah, I mean, so she was Pentecostal. She converted to Pentecostalism in 1907, and they sort of trace the sort of founding of Pentecostalism just to 1906 in Los Angeles in Azusa Street. And a charismatic preacher named William J. Seymour, who was the son of freed slaves, was preaching this gospel that kind of emphasized prophetic gifts. So this idea during the Pentecost that Jesus and his apostles were visited by the Holy Spirit and were bestowed with the ability to speak in tongues, to do divine healing, and to feel the Holy Spirit physically in their bodies. And I mean, there's more to Pentecostalism, but the thing to kind of emphasize is that it's a very close relationship with Jesus, it's pretty one-on-one, and it's physical. Like there's physical manifestation.
The role of the Holy Spirit is really huge.
Yes. Right. And when she went in to see Robert Semple, the hot Irish preacher, she would.
Do you have any pictures? I didn't get to see.
There are, yeah.
Okay,
I'll show you later.
You have a lot
he
of
was
great
like
pictures,
blue-eyed and black hair and like 6'7" or something, and she's like, I love Jesus. Wait, what was I saying?
The personalization, you were saying, the sense.
Oh, yeah. Oh, but also, like, when she went in to go see him preach, she was with her father, and she was like, oh, let's go in and make fun of them. They called them the Holy Rollers, right? So this is like, they're these kind of weirdos in 1907. But immediately, she's like, who was I to judge this incredible, powerful, charismatic, intense experience that's happening. Like, I want to be a part of it.
So that's one thing I wanted to ask you about, because I think there are lots of great biographies, and some are really just factual, but they're great because the people are interesting and someone does a nice job telling a compact, compelling story. But to me, the best biographies are the ones that really get you into the evolving state of mind, not just of the main character, but the people around them. And you do a beautiful job on that. And one place you really do it is the conversion experience she has. Could you talk a little bit about how you did that, how you conveyed, how you move from, if you haven't, I'm around church people, but I'm a full heathen. And so I have never had.
Same.
So I've never had that experience, but I have seen it and I've wondered, and you do such a beautiful job of putting us in her head. How did you do that?
Well, she preached about it for 35 years. So there's just endless sermons and writings about that experience, and it's something she visited over and over again. I mean, in terms of, because this is the Biography Center, like, just to sort of take a little turn there, she was a tricky person to write about, in that there's not a lot of personal writing, right? There's not a lot of letters, there's no journals, there's no inner life, or not no inner life, but very little private life that was there for me to find. And what I was told by her archive, there's a couple of archivists that are still employed by the church, was that anything she thought, she just immediately put either in the newsletter, the magazine, the radio station, or in her sermon. And so, I mean, to the extent that when she died, she was buried in an open casket with a telephone on top of her. Yes. Yeah, so it's like, because she would be like, wait, I have a thought, you know? I was like, are there telegram receipts, you know, like.
But the good part is, because I recognize that is having an autobiographically oriented
Yes.
preacher who loves talking about their story, their own personal stories, gives you a lot to work with, even if it's not exactly, it's filtered through the public eye.
Yeah, I mean, I felt like I had to kind of try and trace it, because she also, I mean, she loves adjectives. Like, every word gets 5 adjectives. You know, you kind of have to, like, boil it down. But like, for me, I saw this point in her writing when she started to get famous. She was doing these big divine healings around the country, and crowds of thousands and thousands of people would come. They'd, like, throw the bodies through the window of, like, their children to be healed. It's like wild kind of mania. And there's around this point where she starts referring to herself as we. Yeah, and I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, there's a shift, you know? So I felt like I had to find it in those places in her writing where she wasn't sort of privately reckoning with what it felt like to be objectified or to become so famous, but you can kind of see, and her description of the crowds become darker during that time. You know, like she starts to write, you know, initially, you know, the early stories of healings are very intimate, and she's really connected to people, and it's really like these individual stories. And then there's the point by the early 20s where, you know, she's got a list of 70 ailments that she's cured, and the crowd coming at her it feels a little threatening.
It seems like the more fringe style behavior, certainly less mainline, the speaking tongues, the ecstatic shakes and that sort of thing, and the healing, I'm not sure, they seem like they fade a little bit over time. Is that the case?
Yeah, I mean, she really kind of brought Pentecostalism into the mainstream in so many ways. It had been sort of a fringe religion, and so, and to finish my work of saying who she is, she started the Angelus Temple in 1923, which I like to say is the first megachurch, but I know that yours is
He's
also
not even the first. I think.
I think
Theodore Parker in Boston. That's my.
Okay.
But just a little bit before. I think that's my
first
best
20th
reading.
century megachurch. I mean,
I mean, what is preaching in Coriolanus? I mean, or not Coriolanus, Corinth.
I mean, hers was like sort of like contemporary megachurches in that it had 26 26 departments and a publishing arm and a childcare and a kitchen and a school and, you know, a newsletter and a magazine and a radio station. And it had this huge emphasis on entertainment. So that is just one thing to say. At our Angelus Temple, these sermons that she would bring Hollywood in and do these massive spectacles and productions. So it was sort of the beginning of what we think of as like Christian entertainment, so to
You didn't
speak.
say she had an early smoke machine?
Maybe.
You said something like
Probably.
that.
I mean, she definitely, you know, she brings the motorcycle on stage. I think she has a lion on
And
stage.
her costuming.
Yeah.
She wears nurses out
Yes.
white, but a full-length one.
Yes.
And a cape,
Yes.
which is not a typical.
No, as she says originally she started wearing it because it was all she could afford, and then it kind of became her shtick.
So she builds this fabulous institution, extraordinarily well-to-do, even though most of its congregants, I think, were on the poorer side. Is that right?
Yeah, it's, you know, I mean, for her, especially in Los Angeles, it's this moment in time when Los Angeles itself is becoming a city. So, you know, in the 1920s, it became the fastest growing city in the history of the world, like of that speed of growth. You know, it went from this, like a few, you know, maybe 30,000 or something to millions. And, you know, as she is arriving and building her temple, they are building the streets of downtown. So she's really kind of integral into the structure of the city and the framework and kind of the personality of the city, you know? And the people who were moving to Los Angeles are, you know, were often people from rural areas who are coming to find work in cities and
Looking for something.
Yeah.
How many people still go to California looking for something?
all of us, we all go.
And so there's a perfect moment to say, and then things get darker, as they did in Hollywood at the time, and her cousin across the road, and often happens in these religious leaders, not always by any means, but so often they fly very high and something shifts. And sometimes it's very mysterious what shifts. Can you tell us about that? And of course, you have to at least talk a little about the kidnapping.
Yeah. I mean, so she, at kind of what seemed like the height of her fame in 1926, was, you know, involved in local politics, you know, this huge radio station that is broadcast up and down the West Coast. And she has taken to going down to Venice Beach and swimming in the ocean with her assistant. And so on May 18th, she goes down with her assistant, she sets up a towel, gets a snack, sends her assistant to run an errand, is working on a sermon entitled Light and Darkness. Yeah. And walks down into the ocean to swim laps, which was something that she did. And she vanishes.
So a good chunk of the book, a very suspenseful chunk, which is not easy to do because there's a lot of back and forth. There's a lot of nonsense.
Yeah, there is a lot of nonsense.
But is nonetheless quite suspenseful, because what you do so beautifully is it's not just the suspense of an investigation. Was she really kidnapped? Who kidnapped her? How did you get her back? But also there's this sort of emotional, intellectual, spiritual suspense. Not only did she perhaps kidnap herself or run off, that was one of the big questions. But if she did, or even if she just took a break, for God's sakes, as somebody who might need a break from the public scrutiny, does it seem like she's a different person? Is she changing in a major way? Because she does, I mean, over time, it is the case that you talk about how she used to be nothing but love. Well, now she becomes a lot more about her enemies and smiting of her enemies. She talks a lot more about hellfire than she ever did.
She reenacts the crucifixion with her as Jesus and the district attorney as, Pontius Pilate.
Right. So
Why not?
Is it that thing that we see now so often, that when people are attacked by their allies, they end up going to bed with their enemies? Or is it something different? Is there something happening? Would it have been better if she just retired and said, listen, one thing we did as ministers was buy a lot of real estate in LA? I mean, what did you think was happening there in her mind?
I mean, I think, and my sense, I did construct the book hopefully in a way where people can kind of read the facts and get a sense of what they think. And I will say here, like, there have been a number of biographies of her over the last century. There was one in 1930 while she was still alive, written by a female journalist that's like incredible, great research, fantastic, very funny, but like the meanest.
Who's the author?
Her name was Nancy Barr Mavity. She was a reporter for the Oakland paper, but like she cannot say a single fact about Aimee without like insulting her.
That's funny. Same set of years, biography of Henry Beecher.
Really?
Same thing.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, and you're like, well, thank you for all this incredible work, but like it's hard to see.
But you're a charlatan deep down.
Yeah.
Like I
Yeah.
can't say anything really too nice about you. Because
Yeah, but I also the reason I bring it up is I didn't get the feeling that it aged very well. That was my sense, and then there's kind of the Valley of the Dolls version biography from the '60s, and there's a couple biographies from the '90s which are good, but like one of them explains divine healing as like a mass hallucination, uses like a psychological sort of analysis for it. The other one, which was written by a Christian historian, has like this much on the kidnapping, which was like a pretty big part of her life. And I felt this thing of like people had either kind of chosen her, as the title is, like either that she was very bad or she was very good. And yeah, so the book is sort of, my sense is that she was both.
So
Did that answer your question? No.
No, because I want to know what happened. Well, yes. Yes, that she obviously is a person of great humanity. Okay, so one thing I found, so I'm thinking the whole time, what is it that makes people feel this kind of incredible spirituality, having never felt it, I was genuinely interested in how she does that, how she conveys it to others. But I also started thinking, she reminded me less of my minister and more of many of the Johns who used to go to Polly Adler's brothel, which is many of them were kind of manic. Yeah. And then they would crash. Yeah. And they accomplished tremendous things. They were the head of corporations, they were inventors, they were big shots. And then they would crash, but they were men, and they weren't religious figures. And so at first I was like, I wonder how much, and I don't want to be reductive because physical illness is not, or mental illness is not the only thing going on anytime for anyone. But then I was a little disappointed because towards the end, when she survives, she lasts, but she keeps breaking things.
Yeah.
She keeps breaking her relationship with her mother
and
her daughter and so many of her longtime compatriots.
Yeah. I think there was, first of all, I think there's a thing you see with performers, so to speak, where they sort of the expression like leave it all on the stage, right? There's some of that with her where you feel this kind of great emptying out. By the end of her life, she is so thin from weird diets that and maybe like some kind of South American worm that she got, but that she's so thin that she's being carried from the pulpit back to her apartment to load ice cream, and her son is carrying her, and her only companion is her spider monkey, and it's just this very lonely existence, and you feel like she really it was all for the audience. And I'd heard from people that she did not like to be one-on-one. Yeah, like she preferred a crowd. She did not want to be in a room with just a few people. So that, I think, is part of it. I think, and then I think that there is something that happens to her. So to say she disappears into the ocean, 36 days later, she walks back in from the desert in Mexico, 600 miles away, with this kind of unbelievable story of being kidnapped. And right away there's questions. And she comes back to Los Angeles. Yeah, she was wearing like a white dress and a corset. So, and maybe had been in the desert for 13 hours, but like was not sunburned. But, and didn't ask for water. She asked for a telephone. But she comes back to Los Angeles, and there's two court proceedings, which end up cumulatively to have been the most expensive jury proceedings in Los Angeles until the Manson murders. So just enormous scale, citywide kind of obsession. You know, I mean, there's headlines in the New York Times many days, you know, the Los Angeles Times. It's just this huge national story. And she's kind of picked apart, you know, every aspect of her sort of genuineness as a religious actor, about her sex life, her virtue as a woman, as a mother. You know, I mean, there's pictures in there of like the the detectives like actually going through her lingerie piece by piece. You know, where is it manufactured? And so it becomes like a question of who she is, not what she did. And I think that that had a really corrosive effect on her. And my sense is that after that trial, so it ends at the end of 1926, and she gets off. I don't think I'm ruining anything by saying that. And in 1927, she goes on this victory tour around the country. That's what she called it, which might sound familiar.
The amount of travel she did.
Yeah,
is
she's
just
incredible.
amazing.
Yeah, I mean, all over the world. But she goes on this victory tour, and she is a changed woman. Something feels sort of almost chemically different, and she is obsessed with her enemies. She is obsessed with being right and seeing as a true actor. And I think, you know, my theory is that that criticism like became something she absorbed and changed who she was and changed her sense of self. But in terms of your other question about why she did it, to come back to it, there is this mother-daughter story. And her mother had a vision of who she was and who she was supposed to be. And you get the sense that Aimee really, like, why would she do this crazy thing? And I mean, the story itself, not my book, but the story of what happened is like the craziest story ever. So just as a small sampling, there's the only eyewitness who says that they saw the kidnappers is a blind lawyer.
She is paid.
Yeah, well,
Eventually, it turns
yeah,
out.
that she does end up writing a few checks too.
Oh, I believe if she's described as he's hired by local bootleggers
Yes,
because they prefer their
he's like
lawyers to be blind.
Yes, yes, literally. He's a blind lawyer used by bootleggers. He's out in Long Beach. He's a distant cousin of former President McKinley. And during the proceedings, as he's like being called to testify, he ends up drowning in a ditch of water that is like only has a foot. And I mention it just because it gives you a flavor of how insane this trial is.
Not even the weirdest
Yeah,
thing.
but he said he thought that she was doing the whole thing for her mother. He told his secretary that.
As a way to, you mean, well, clear. It sounds like one way to read it is she was having a flirtation or a little fling with her radio operator, and they ran off for a while. I don't know, maybe forever, maybe not forever,
Maybe like 10 days.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it was going to be
Yeah.
forever, or maybe
Right,
it
right.
was not. Maybe it was never. But it wasn't just that she missed her audience, but she clearly felt beholden to her mother in some way. That.
Yeah, I mean, I started thinking a lot doing it about like what a self is. I mean, I don't know if this is like something biographers end up thinking about, but you're like, oh, people really change and they have almost kind of a chemical reaction with their environment. And her mother is so important because her mother held up this idea of who she should be. And ultimately, you feel like there's some level performing for that idea.
Well,
and her audience.
And she was also her actual crush. She was the structure. She was her banker. She was her accountant. She was the person who ran the house.
Yeah, she carried a gun.
She created the structure that allowed her, if she was indeed, because by the end, I have to say, when she's so self-destructive, I was like, oh, sadly, this seems less special. She now just seems like a lot of people I personally know.
Yeah.
They get to a certain point, and if they lose the people around them who are like, you know what, I'm out.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of what her mother does, right?
It's a very symbiotic relationship for a while where her mother manages and contains all this kind of charisma and power, I would say.
Impulsiveness.
Yes.
She's obviously very impulsive.
Very
and that's
impulsive.
part of her part of what makes her so great.
Yeah.
So to go back to that self question, and we'll open it up in a few moments for questions. I was thinking about that a lot. Well, I said two things. Okay, so one thing is I have to say this. I can't even read it. It's one of her. I pulled it out of the book. It actually. Can you read it? Because
Yes.
I don't have my glasses on.
Oh, yeah. This is my Trump quote.
Yeah, it's your Trump quote. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
It's crazy when I found this. I was like, what? I believe that there is such faith in Angelus Temple and loyalty to its pastor that if an angel from heaven were to come down and say, "Sister is not the child of God," they would not believe it. Aimee Semple McPherson.
She never said she was going to shoot anyone.
She never said she would shoot
Fifth
anyone on
Avenue.
Fifth Avenue, but
what I have written is, underneath this is, why do people do this? And so you, obviously, one of the things that makes it such a strong read is you use what the novelist might call limited omniscient narrator, which is you are really telling it from her perspective. There are clearly many, many people who are adversaries or have different opinions, and they're there, but she's big main character energy, as the kids say nowadays. And so you don't put us quite as much in the mind of these other people around her. I'd be curious, the Trump quote, what is going on? Because obviously some people decided she's a charlatan.
Yeah.
Some people, which I find impossible to say, because there were clearly many people whose lives were changed for the better, and she clearly had a relationship with God that one might say maybe she doesn't heal. I don't know.
There weren't a lot of like unhappy customers, but I mean, that's something I feel like they were, two people in those exchanges and everyone seemed satisfied with the experience. So who am I to judge? Right. Like I've never been healed. I've never seen a miraculous healing, but people seemed to believe that it was happening, and there were these accounts.
So what?
But that's not your question.
Well, it sort of is. I mean, because it's really that question of faith. What is it that makes people? Here's a perfect example of someone who has turned themselves into an angel, cannot allow themselves to be anything but that because the world won't let them. And when she does, so she bursts out, she runs away, and then decides she's not done and has to face the consequences of being trapped by this, an angelic person. What did they find that transcended all her behavior? What is it that those people who will let Trump shoot them, what do we know about faith?
There's so many.
You have a master's in divinity for that.
so I can answer this question. Maybe I'll sidestep it for a second and say, I know, sorry. But, one of the reasons I wanted to write about Aimee is I had done, my first book was about the town I grew up in, and we had, my parents were part of the Transcendental Meditation movement, and we had an Indian guru, and everything about our life was shaped by him. I was a student of the Maharishi School of the Age of Enlightenment. I learned my first mantra when I was 3 years old. The majority of my class time was spent on the science of creative intelligence, which was Maharishi's philosophy of living. Like, everything about my life was about this guru. And when I was working on this memoir, which originally, honestly, I had just wanted to do an investigative book and was like kind of pushed to do a memoir, but fine. But I did a lot of research on Maharishi, and in doing so, I really started to see like his humanity, I would say. He'd always been this kind of Wizard of Oz character for me. He didn't live in Iowa where we lived. He lived in Europe, and he would telecast in just for celebrations. Or if like we had birthdays or celebrations, we would put a piece of cake in front of his picture. And he always seemed incredibly ancient and omniscient to me, but like actually he was, kind of a regular person who maybe had girlfriends and, it was interested in money and math and politics.
Why is that? Why do we object to that? We don't object to it from other leaders.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, is that I was, by the time I finished that book, I was like, I think there's something really interesting about what the followers do. Like I felt almost sympathy. I mean, first of all, like it was a totally fine, if you're gonna call it a cult, like it was a pretty nice cult. We just had to meditate and eat vegetarian food. Like it wasn't, I was not abused. You know, I started to feel sort of sympathy for him in some way of like, gosh, that must have sucked to be objectified and kind of isolated like that and put on a pedestal, and very confusing again about who the self is, who you are. And I was curious about what that would look like in a woman. Because the story with all these religious leaders is so often about men. You know, I mean, take Henry
Well,
Beecher.
because if you're a conduit for God or the Godhead or whatever, the
Yeah.
divine creative intelligence, people want to get with you.
Yeah.
I mean, like, it's very enticing. If you
Yeah.
might, if I can hear Jesus through you, well,
Yeah.
surely it would be
Yeah.
really great to hug you more.
Right.
You know, I mean,
Right, and Marishi could elevate, could make you enlightened, you know? I mean, my friend's mother went to go see him, and she like he gave her a mantra to be skinny, you know? Like, I mean, it was like he was God. Just a fun fact. But I just to say, yeah, to be honest, she was always skinny, so I was like, why are you giving that lady that mantra? But I think, yeah, like he was just treated like, yes, like people wanted to be close to him. It's like Aimee, like people wanted to touch him. So there's something about that, this elevation of people that I'm really interested in. And yes, where they're the conduit, the messenger, so they're privileged, they have a privileged reality. They're seeing the world in a way that seems somehow more true and more real than the world we live in.
so then there is maybe two things going on. One is, if
Yeah.
that is the person who represents God in whatever form to you, or your access
Yeah.
to that tremendous enlightenment, then you have every incentive to not believe anything bad about them. And but on the other hand, what do they do with the cognitive dissonance when you discover the Maharishi has a kid with somebody, or she is not purity embodied?
Well, I almost think of it in the reverse of like, why do we have to think of ourselves as so low and terrible that we elevate? Like, why is having a child and having a relationship or being interested in having like a financially solvent religious organization so bad? Like all these worldly things. So I almost see it more from that end of like, why do we have this good and bad, you know, vice and virtue viewpoint? I find...
Or special leader versus everyone else.
Yeah.
Because that's often what it is.
Yeah, but I think it creates, I mean, I used this word the other day and it's not the right word, but I think it creates perversion. Like it creates a darkness where it's like, oh, I have to be this way facing forward. And so there's often then stuff that's happening behind. Yeah. So, I mean, that's what I found so interesting about your book too. Like, I think there is something about that, right? And I also think there's something about preaching that you feel incredible. I don't know, I've never preached, but my sense from reading about it is that you feel incredibly connected to people. Like there is some big transcendent feeling that that somehow sometimes leads to consummation. You know what I mean? and I don't know. But I think the divides for me are problematic, like that they lead to bad behavior.
Yeah, and the whole time I kept feeling that here.
Yeah.
It was really one of the many wonderful things to think about when you're reading this. Is it gets to the fundamental question: what is a self, and why, and how do we make it move through time, in particular?
Yeah. In front of other people.
In front of other people, especially if you're obsessed with being in front of other people.
Yeah.
Right. I think we're about ready for opening up questions. Yes, please.
Did you learn?
Do you want to? Can I hand you?
Thank you. Did you learn Did you learn anything about the business of going on the road and evangelizing? How did they do it? Were there agents and brokers and event managers and people who would, make it happen for her and her mother?
I mean,
Wondering.
what's incredible to see is initially Aimee's traveling with husband number 2, And they're like living hand to mouth, like, oh, we're going to pray that we can find a fish in 3 hours to feed us and the family, like really dire poverty. And ultimately, he's kind of kicked to the curb, or he leaves, depending on how you see it. And her mother comes down, and people write and make requests, like, would Aimee come preach? And Minnie would write back and say, yes, she would love to. She'd love to come. If you can send a check here, then we'll be on our way. And so she would secure funding before she would do a visit. So she was very smart. They had to, but they weren't doing that before. Before, it has this like almost kind of shamanic feel of just like following a voice. And Minnie sort of, commodified it and made it functional. So in answer to that question, I think Minnie was many of those things for many years.
But then later, when she's in her big,
Yeah.
her big grand world tour years, she obviously
Yes, then she has a
experiments, in
press
fact,
manager,
doesn't she,
she-
with charging.
Oh, yes, yes. On her victory tour initially, so first of all, she hires a bunch of like fallen journalists.
Basically, that's what Beecher did too.
Yeah. Oh, really?
You start to find the people who are not going to be mean to you about
Yeah.
your faults.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. I mean, just as a former newspaper reporter, the weird, spongy relationship between the press and the people they were covering at that time is like really another world. But yeah, so she hired a number of journalists who would, essentially be those things, agents, and ask for fees. And on her victory tour, I think she was asking for $3 a head or something, but then nobody showed up. Yeah.
You know, offer. Did she drink with them?
That is such a good question. Since this book has come out, I've had people come up to me and say, "Oh, like, thank you for signing my book. My grandfather said he was her drinking buddy." And there's a cocktail named after her from Panama, which her mom threatened to sue about. I mean, all of these things are like,
Lawsuits. Could you offhand the number of lawsuits she was involved in?
I feel like I should.
Yeah,
Is
that's a
it
good-
37?
Oh, I thought it was bigger. than that.
44?
Oh,
It's something.
42 or
Yeah,
something
yeah.
like
It's dozens. Yeah, it might be in the 40s by the end of her
And
life.
maybe that's the thing. Maybe it's not that we expect our religious leaders to be perfect, but we do not believe that they should be quite as involved with mammon as
Yes.
they are. I mean, that there's
Yeah.
supposed to be an alternative. Yes.
Well, and she really goes through this very like modern process of trying to monetize it. So after her mother leaves, she gets involved in a hotel chain, she gets involved in a real estate development, vacation homes, a cruise line. She applies for a television license the year she died. So she's like a proto televangelist. Really invented all the tricks of the trade, but didn't quite make it to television.
Other questions?
I'm loving it. It's great.
Thank you.
And you touched on this at the beginning, but I'm wondering if you have more thoughts, just maybe about what charisma is and how it develops, because you talked about how idealized she is, but I'm just assuming that's something that you've thought about and might say more on.
Yeah, I mean, and there's two, it's a little confusing because there's charismatic Christians, right? And that's this idea of this living like Holy Spirit in their lives. But you're asking about the persona aspect of it. And I think it's a talent. Like, I think it's an ability to draw people in and capture their imagination. I think in whatever form they're storytellers, right? So they sort of suspend you out of the reality you're in, whether it's a musician or an artist or an actor or a preacher, where they can take you from where you are and, I mean, weirdly kind of take you out of yourself and suspend you into another reality that they construct. So, I mean, I think of it as a sort of conjuring in some ways, although I'm guessing that language would be offensive to her church.
Biblical. It's a biblical, or it's a Greek word, right?
Charisma.
Comes from Diane.
Sort of in the heathen box with but I'm just curious, this is the era of the muckraker at the turn of the 20th century. Is anybody writing about the fact that this woman is nothing but a artist? I mean, is she having to deal with any of that kind of, pushback to her charismatic persona?
She was, although I don't think my book asserts that she was nothing but a con artist.
I'm not
Yeah.
suggesting, I'm not saying, but I'm just wondering if anybody out there in the
Yes.
world was making
Yes.
that suggestion.
Yeah, and actually I was going to say a lot of, you were talking about the perspective, and there's a point, probably only obvious to me as you said this, but when they're doing the investigation, I try and switch from her point of view to law enforcement's point of view. And so, yes, so there's a little, I try and do a little Law and Order toggle. My favorite show. Of like, where they're doing the investigation and what they're finding and how incredibly obvious the truth is to them and how
There's
they
a
see
poor
things.
lawyer who ends up.
I know.
How do you say his name?
Are you talking about Joseph Ryan?
No,
Oh,
the-
no, Asa Kai's,
Yeah.
but it rhymes with tries. He ends up in Alcatraz, and then a used car salesman. It's a dark time.
First Alcatraz and then used
Yeah,
car salesman?
yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
it usually goes the
He
other way
walks into
around.
Alcatraz. I wish I don't have this kind of memory. I wish I did, but he walks in to Alcatraz, and there's reporters following him, and he says something like, "What is life but like a moment? You blink and it's over."
Yeah.
And he walks in, and then he gets out and sells cars. You're like,
Something
yeah.
to Look forward to
Yeah.
in the Trump era. Sir.
Hi. I was curious about her legacy, if anyone has claimed her. She took these stances. Now that evangelical Christianity has become so closely aligned with the political right, she existed and did her work before that, and she staked claims politically that could go both ways at different times. And then she's left behind both the temple and the Foursquare movement. And I'm wondering if any of them have embraced her as, yep, we're from that. Yeah. Or if other people have said, like, she's scandalous, who? We don't want anything to do with this person.
Yeah, it's a great question. So the Foursquare Church, which is the denomination that she started, has 8 million members today. And then there's 650 million Pentecostal charismatic Christians in the world, so a quarter of the world's Christians. So her impact and legacy is huge, but the Foursquare Church has a really kind of hands-off relationship with her. In one sense, she had an apartment that was built in the back of the temple, and it's open as a museum, and you can tour it. But
Still a Foursquare Church? Or no, she
Yes.
left it is.
Yeah.
Okay.
yeah, and that's it's integrated with the Dream Center, which is a big institution in Los Angeles. They still do a ton of outreach. They run a rehab program. They've done a lot of stuff for fire victims. So there's a lot of good that the church continues to do in the community, which is like one of the complex things as we're talking about the end of her life. I mean, during the Great Depression, the church soup kitchen fed more than 1.5 million people. So the balance sheet is a complex balance sheet, and but in terms of her legacy, I went to a centennial celebration, which I assumed was going to be like hagiography, like just a celebration of Aimee, and it was they were so careful in talking about it, and they talk about like 2 things about her. Basically that she was a woman, that she started this huge church, and I guess number 3, that she did outreach in the teens to the African American community. And they don't talk about anything else. And I didn't even try this on my tour, but what I've heard from other people when they've taken the tour of her apartment is like, if you ask about the kidnapping, you get like dead face, So, she is a really complex character, and I think complex characters are tricky to wrap your arms around if you're a church interested in growth. So that's my sense. She has not been claimed, so to speak. Like, there's lots of people who owe a real debt to her in terms of the work she did and the sort of path that she pioneered, but she has not been embraced because I think and it's part of why she was so incredibly famous and then forgotten, is that I think she became sort of a joke, which is sad.
So they don't sell your book in the gift shop at the
Not
temple?
yet. Not yet. Not yet.
Do we have time for another question? I'm not keeping. Do we have time yet? Any other questions? Did you find yourself, when I was working on Beecher, there were moments where I thought, this vision of Christ, which I had kind of explicitly rejected. I grew up actually right near a Foursquare Church. I had no idea. That was my first big surprise reading the book. And
Too, by the way, same.
Yeah,
They're
a lot-
everywhere.
There were a lot of evangelical Christian churches around where we lived, and I had always kind of rejected it precisely because it was it was a strong culture, and I felt it was so narrow-minded, which I don't think is entirely fair on my part, but
Or wrong.
yeah, exactly. There were moments when I was working on the Beecher book where I could almost feel a pull towards what he was saying when he was in his most utopian moments, that wouldn't it be wonderful if this were true, and maybe I should take this more seriously. And I would then mentally, I would shut it down. And I don't think it was because of the work. I think it was because I was like, I don't want all the obligations that would come with having to really think that through and decide. I might be what if Jesus is going to save me?
Yeah.
He didn't. Well, there's still time. There's still time. Did you find, you had a far more intense religious education growing up than I did, but did you find yourself in any way moved spiritually by reading about the Pentecostal experience?
Yeah, for sure. And I have a few friends that I grew up with who have written to me after reading the book and been like, hey, Pentecostalism, not unlike yogic flying.
Yeah, well, maybe, yeah.
I think there is something about a really personal experience that is connected to the divine, that sort of you lose the logical mind, right? That's certainly part of the idea with transcendental meditation and the advanced techniques, and definitely with Pentecostalism, is this idea of that which is bigger than us and more powerful and sublime and divine is not something that you can reason your way to. And both of them have these kind of physical experiences where you manifest that power, like it takes you over. And so, no, I did not have any experiences with the Holy Spirit, but I think I feel a lot of empathy for it. And I've been to churches where people are speaking in tongues, and it seems cool. And I don't think things that are weird are wrong, obviously. But you know what I mean? There is some really weird stuff that happens, and I'm not so convinced that I fully understand what's going on that I'm like, oh, that's good, and then or that's right and that's wrong. I don't actually have any idea what's going on. So that's kind of my.
Biographers don't do that.
Yeah.
We don't judge.
Yeah.
We don't judge.
Yeah. I don't judge in life mostly.
By the way, I know we're just about done, right? If you have, I didn't get to do a full dive into Claire's first book, but I did read a good chunk of it. It is fabulous. It is, like they always do, make the ladies rate them as memoirs. But it is really a fun read, if I will. And then I'll say this we're going to end on a dirty note. That just last night, as I was packing, getting myself ready to come into New York this morning, I was looking at your Wikipedia page finally. Oh, there. And there's a link to this fabulous article that I highly recommend everyone read. She did the very first expose of Girls Gone Wild. Now, maybe not all of you remember Girls Gone Wild, but it was very big in the 20s.
The reason I ended up doing, there's a few steps in between, but I had been in divinity school and applied for an internship at the LA Times, and the head of the business section thought it would be funny to have me be a business reporter, so he accepted me. That was what he said. He was like, I don't care that you went to journalism school, I think it'd be funny to have a religion
Times were different
reporter.
back then.
And then very quickly I sort of gravitated towards the adult entertainment beat, mostly because nobody else was covering it. So that's how that,
Business news.
it was business. It was the business of adult
And
entertainment.
sadly, I did not actually get, so I'm recommending something that I did not get to read after the first paragraph, but it begins with her being beaten up by Joe Francis, the founder of Girls Gone Wild. I believe you're pushed up against a car with your arm behind you. And then it was behind the paywall and it was 1 o'clock in the morning, so I did not suddenly
My
decide I've
editor for
gotta
that piece is
subscribe.
right here, Amy Was. You can talk to her about it.
Was it easy to edit? I mean, you must have had a little bit of worry about a lawsuit, yes? No, because
Yeah, it was a very like we were all. It was like blood in the water for journalists. Like I called Amy and was like, "Am I gonna get fired for getting beat up?" You know, like I was a new reporter, and she was like, "Draw."
awesome. Maybe you want to open with that?
That was Amy's suggestion.
Yeah, exactly. There's a good editor. Well, thank you, Claire.
Thank you.
you, Kai. Thank you to Shelby White, because none of this would be possible, and to CUNY and the Levy Center. And Tad, thank you above all.
Thank you.
Sorry, Tad's going to tell you something.
Books on sale outside.
Books on sale outside, and get it. It's good. What a great. It was such a fun. It was a joy. I mean, it was a joy.